Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the UX Research Rundown, the third season, episode 2. My name is Henrik Mattsson. I am the CEO of Lookback and also the host of this show. And as you might have noticed, if you listen to the first episode of this season, we have changed our main theme for this season. We used to talk about how do you get your team along on the journey that is research. And that's, of course, still relevant, but we've moved on to something else that's pretty hot right now, and that's researching AI and leveraging AI and LLMs and stuff like that for research. So I've invited a bunch of interesting guests, and today I have the privilege of having with me Jessa Anderson from ServiceNow. And as per ancient tradition, podcast tradition here, we're going to let her introduce herself in a little moment, and then we'll get going talking about AI in research. So welcome. Thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Awesome. And as we always do, I'm going to start by asking you for your origin story. Like, how did you get into research? What was your background before research? And how did you get into kind of the AI stuff as a researcher?
All right, I'll try to give an abbreviated version because it's a pretty non-linear path here. I've always loved research and trying to understand the why of things, what motivates people. In my undergrad years, I studied psychology and literature, weirdly, but did a lot of research within the field of psychology, including in childhood traumatic grief and some really heavy topics. Graduated at a terrible time of the recession in 2009. So had to kind of get scrappy with different jobs and getting experience. So worked at like a health marketing communication firm and then traveled. And that really spiked my interest combining those two into a PhD in public health with that emphasis in health behavior. And so that's where I got really heavy into research with mixed methods. So lots of qualitative mixed with pretty intense quantitative as well. Lots of modeling and things like that. But really complementing the two, which is my personal passion, is using both of these methods. And so that's where I was really doing research. Realized academia and nonprofits weren't for me and came into ServiceNow. So one thing you'll hear is I did not mention any AI experience or training. When I came to ServiceNow, that's where I learned how to leverage the skills I had and apply them in a slightly different industry and field in UX research. And here is where I got into AI. And so I was put on at that time, the only product that was being researched, that was AI at ServiceNow. And so I know it feels like AI is new in some ways with ChatGPT and all these things exploding onto the scenes, but we were investigating more of the classic AI, so more of the machine learning and a lot of people's first contact with knowing with AI through social media and things like that, more that type of AI.
Right, cool. Yeah, it's on the last episode, we had Jess Holbrook who had worked with this for like 12 years or something, like all the classics. So he was talking about the ChatGPT moment, which was kind of like, but yeah, super interesting. Yes. And so what have you, first of all, let me ask you, so when we're talking about research and AI, there are like these two general things we might mean. One is researchers doing research on AI, integrated products, and then researchers leveraging AI and LLMs to do their job. And of course, in that field, we have all of these discussions about like, will we be replaced by robots? And if not, then why, etc. So where have you have you done both of those, or like where are you in those two buckets?
Yeah, so I am more in the researching AI in terms of how we integrate it into products. And here at ServiceNow, my area has really focused more so on how we can, there's two sides of it, how we kind of look at it. There's the side of how do we help people who are not data scientists or trained AI experts in any way feel confident and empowered to implement AI into their solutions, delivering technology and these automation and helpful processes to their end users. So that might be agents, for example, or their customers or their employees, often those people. And so that's one side of it, which is a bit more on the technical side. And then the other side of it is the folks who are consuming the AI outputs in their day-to-day work, and how we look at to build trust and gain confidence and make sure it's augmenting how they work and really adding value. So that's the area I've been really heavily in at ServiceNow for about almost 4 years now. But I'm always curious about how we can use these other tools that are now coming out a lot more. But that has not been my focus.
Right. Interesting. So what are kind of the, for someone who's moving into, because I think we can expect that there's going to be an acceleration of kind of researchers moving into researching AI products, basically, right? So, but you've had a bit of a head start. You were there before the ChatGPT moment. What are some of the differences you would say between the AI stuff and just regular product work, if there are any?
Yeah. No, that's a fantastic question. And I do believe there is. So at ServiceNow, we have a whole AI ML UX research team, which I'm now one of the managers of. And our approach there is that there are some differences in ways of looking at it. And this was true with classic AI. So we really leaned into something called human-centered AI, which is tied to responsible AI as well. But really, how do we help people earn the trust in these products? And with AI, there are differences. So, for example, we know people want to know, especially in the context of their work and life, that something came from AI and not another human, for example.
Right.
The way they need to look at it is different. As well as within generative AI, so by generative AI, I mean the large language models, things we see like ChatGPT, where it has become a lot more conversational. So of course that transparency in making sure they know that it's not a human is important. Again, especially we're hearing it in the context of their work. But in addition, this is has different types of errors and imperfections that we did not see in classic AI. So by that, I mean, it can hallucinate.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So it can actually make things up, but present it in a way that sounds very confident, and you might not know. And so we have found that people, if we don't tell them that, hey, you need to look closely at this and make sure it's right, they don't even know that could be making something up. So this concept of imperfections and inaccuracies, and then making sure that human can look it over, edit it, be in control of it, which often is simplified as human in the loop, is really, really critical in this space. So it's a slightly different perspective and way of looking at things. And because generative AI is in such an early stage right now, these errors and things are even more likely to happen. And so even designing and creating experiences in a slightly counter way than we are used to in a normal product space, potentially, right? We all have been told, make it seamless, easy, right? Yeah. And now we're saying, hey, let's actually maybe in certain contexts, add a little friction, slow people down, draw attention to where there may be an error and where there could be a high risk of consequence if they don't check that. So that's what we're actually looking into now, which is, again, a different mindset and way of creating experiences, but recognizing that's where the technology is currently.
That's so interesting. I mean, we've been doing some work of our own in the look back tool where there's so many things we can do, but this is what we've decided basically is exactly what you're saying. Well, the human is one thing, the machine is one thing. It has to be clear who produces what, and there should always be that kind of interaction. But that also, what I've learned when we do that is that the expectation, like, oh, just let the AI do it, or just like, can't it just do it? Like, and that's kind of similar to the slowing down of kind of I think it will be experience. I totally agree with this way of working, but I think a lot of people that build product might experience that as kind of like tying AI's hands behind its back, etc. Have you had that kind of pushback, and if so, how do you handle that in a product team, for example?
Yeah, fantastic point. There is sometimes pushback because it can seem counter in a way. And so one of the things that we've had a lot of luck doing is going to people and the users and exploring, again, like educating the team, for example, that they don't actually have this awareness that it could hallucinate, it could be wrong. It could be missing critical information. And it could be done in a subtle way, which could maybe has worse consequences than if it's a very blatant thing that's made up, right? And so showing the customers who then have these concerns and questions and don't know how to best use it really helps, because they get to see directly what it could be. And hearing from the customers, if we prompt them and say, what might be a consequence for you if you do this? And ultimately, it often leads to, I won't trust it, I won't get value from it, and I won't use it. And if that's the case, then the AI is not doing the purpose it's supposed to do. So again, we're not saying that it will never be able to do these like things where it's really going to help accelerate how we work, and even eventually replace certain really mundane tasks we don't want to do. If I could have it manage my calendar and Outlook for me, I would love that. But so there's certainly opportunity, and we know it's in the very early stages, but really helping them recognize that it is in the early stages, and this is the critical time for us to help people build trust and feel confident and in control. And if they don't, what that risk is. So that seems to really help, is hearing it directly from who those potential users are.
Right. Yeah, no one wants to build technology that everyone is too afraid to use, I guess. So that's
exactly.
A good motivator.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's just interesting because it's I was talking to someone the other day who was kind of suggesting that with the rise of AI, where like technology is becoming almost more like a human, and especially with these large language models, it's just this like irrational user that makes stuff up, and it can't really be trusted. It kind of puts the UX research skill set at the center of like actually deep tech in a sense, so that it would actually put the researcher at the table in a totally different way than before, right? And then on the other hand, you have this kind of what you're talking about, which is that you're slowing down the which has always been one of the issues that product teams take with research, right? It's like, we don't have time to research, we don't have so it's an interesting kind of it's an interesting paradox. I don't know if there's any there wasn't really a question in there, so I apologize, but what's kind of your reflection when you think about that dichotomy somehow?
Well, actually, I love what you said about it's bringing us to the table in a different way. And that's something I really love about the AI space, is people are recognizing that the experience matters tremendously. And again, that it falls to trust and helping people know how it's trusting and adding value to them. And if they don't trust it, they're not going to accept it. And if they don't see the value. So it really brings you to the table earlier. And I think UX researchers who don't already have AI experience, I've noticed sometimes are more hesitant or cautious to speak up and ask questions. And what I would say is you're getting a seat at the table a lot earlier. And you need to take advantage of that and be okay. If not having a fully formed opinion, that's fine. But being able to speak up and ask questions, and that can be things like, is the data really biased?
Right.
Because these can inform consequences too. Are there different guardrails we need to put in place? Are there edge cases we really need to think about? So some certain industries, for example, may have much higher risk and higher consequences, where getting that trade-off is going to be more important. So if we think about healthcare, for example, right? The trade-off might be a lot more important there than, for example, an agent working with a IT ticket. Maybe that isn't quite as high risk. So there's these different ways to balance and think about that. And I think UX professionals can really bring that up at the table, is thinking through those different risks and consequences and what that might look like for real people who have to use it or are impacted by the outcome of it.
Right. Yeah, no, totally. That's a great point. It's we're discussing today with my team, because we're doing some security stuff where a tool could use AI to kind of provide a report for customers about this stuff. And it just felt so dangerous because, first of all, it's high risk environment. It's security. But second of all, also it's a use case where we're asking the AI to provide the answer. There's no human in the loop. It's just like the AI just does it. No one checks it, and then the hallucination, of course, becomes very. The risk of the hallucination is just unchecked, Whereas like you see some other tools where you generate just a draft basically, and then a human is always going to finish it, which is a completely different use case. So you've been doing this for 4 years, and I think in a lot of places there must be some sort of like, you have some categories and some language to talk about all of these different kind of cases and everything. But I think a lot of perhaps listeners that are just moving into this now, and their companies now building their first AI product and everything, like they will reinvent the wheel, and like, so is there anything there that kind of, what are the different considerations? Is there like a map of these buckets where like, okay, well, this is this kind of use case, this is this kind of use case, here it's high risk, here it's not high risk? It's like, has that developed already, or is the field still too young, do you think?
Well, there are actually a lot of amazing tools and resources. Like I said, like people who want to get started, like looking at human-centered AI is, I think, a great way to go. There's a lot of really nice handbooks, tools that have worksheets for it. These are especially helpful if you're going to be working with people who are more what I was describing as the consumer side of it, who are using the AI outputs in their work. And these principles that we have in the field still apply. So, for example, the one that I already brought up was transparency. But transparency actually includes a lot of different elements like interpretability, traceability, data transparency, bias, fairness assessments, and a lot more. But we often can group it into transparency for when we're speaking to people. There's feedback contestability, there's explainability, which has a more traditional UX kind of understanding of it, and then the way it's actually done in the field of AI and ML. So there are a lot of really great resources for frameworks, as well as some like helpful worksheets. One of the simple ones that we often do that works well is just a simple 2x2, right? Yeah. Where you're going to have like the risk and trade-off benefit kind of ratio to walk through and come up with some of the cases and map them out. And that can be a really helpful way to start really concretely thinking about what are the risks and benefits and where would they fall on this balancing act kind of, because it is a bit of a balancing act.
Right. So the message is for someone moving into this now, just because the technology seems pretty new, there's some reading to do. You don't have to invent it all.
There's so many great resources. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Again, there might just be more heightened areas that maybe aren't as well established and are coming out, but people are actively working on it in the field. I just don't know how much is in the hands of UX professionals versus still more in the academic space. But again, like all of these human-centered AI principles, they absolutely still apply. It's just how much more important we might put focus. Like I was saying, because the technology is in such an early stage and the consequences can potentially be higher, how do we think about that and maybe emphasize some, like potentially that feedback contestability part, which is more than like just a thumbs up or thumbs down, but using contestability because users then can provide that feedback, get clarification, challenge the AI's outputs, and give that type of feedback can be really important in AI.
Right. So many questions always. So interesting. So if I understand it correctly, you've been talking to users about you're basically building trust, or you've been doing studies that are trying to understand like how can we build trust with the AI and stuff like that. And some of these things are about like, well, I don't, can I trust it? Can I try, etc. But I've noticed this mega trend when we're doing research with our users who are testing our beta stuff for the AI stuff. It's like there's all of those like, well, can I trust it? Can I use it? But there's also this like, will this technology take my job? Well, yes, I don't like it. Are there those kind of things that you encounter too? Are people worried about it? And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can share my personal opinions and perspectives on it.
Oh, absolutely.
That is definitely a fear we've heard before, as well as sometimes it's a fear from like the managers and the leads who say, we think our employees, right, who we want to use this, are going to be really fearful. And so one thing we've been really leaning into to help counter that is, again, explaining that it's augmenting, not replacing. That's kind of like a big catchphrase for us, is augment, not replace. and explaining how. So again, the more we're building in the human in the loop, the human checks, those human elements into the experience, the more people are seeing that it's really required. And that goes into how important it is when there's a new product or experience for them, especially, again, in their context of work, where they're doing this for many hours a day often, not just something they can discard once, right, and be done with it, like if an app does something you don't like. And so one thing we've seen the really critical part of is helping to set realistic expectations for them on how to use it, what value it'll bring them, and having appropriate onboarding to get them up to speed to it. And that helps to really, what we're seeing, reduce some of the fears, because they realize, oh, I'm really required in this process. It's not going to replace me. As well as I think it falls to leadership, of course, to help message what their goals are and being clear on it. And in general, we almost never hear a goal of, we want to get rid of half of our workforce or anything like that. It's really, how do we make them more productive, feel that they are working on things that matter to them more, and having that time to focus on those things that are really require the human and not as much our AI is good at.
But would you say that when people get past those fears and they actually start using the technology, is that kind of where they land, or are there some real kind of fears here that people, what's the saying, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean you're not being followed.
I love that. So far, this is so early days with this type of technology. So far, we're seeing that it seems to alleviate their fears a bit. But I think there is a lot of fear and unknowns about what will this look like as the technology gets better and what will happen. And I think a lot of that is unknown and kind of being charted now is, where will jobs shift? What will it look like, right? We hear the expectations that, right, there's a lot of ranges, but like at least 40% of your daily tasks, right, should change if AI really reaches its potential. As like kind of a broad average. And so like, what will that look like, and how do we help deal with that? Like, I think a lot of that is still being figured out.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I just worry that there's a trap here for people where, if you're afraid of embracing this technology, you're not going to be replaced by this technology. You're going to be replaced by people who have embraced it. I think that's kind of the risk here. So this mission of, if we really care about users, then, and this is not a new thing. I mean, even with old, like, using, I don't want to name any names here, but there's been a lot of like, let's say cloud products that have some collaboration feature in them that have kind of disrupted and replaced some old school products that were kind of doing the same thing, but without the collaboration and cloud aspect of it, right? And then people just like stayed with one, right? So it's kind of the same. It's kind of the same thing, where we often see, if we really care about users, we want to help them actually solve their problems and do their jobs. Not just sell our product to do it, but just like, hey, this is just a better way of doing it. So
exactly. I think that's why it's always critical to, even when you're working with your product teams and stuff, take a pause and say, what real world problem are we solving, and does it need AI to solve it? That's kind of like a check we do too, because sometimes we're like, maybe a business rule works just fine in this scenario, right? Like, let's not make it too hard or think AI is a magic wand we have to use for everything. But I love your point about how there is the view that we've heard a lot as well, especially from like leadership area, that people have to learn how to use it and help them be more productive. And that's where the market may be going to, especially in certain roles, right? Like developers. Right, there's a lot more help potentially with that. Yeah,
for sure. Cool. So I know you said you hadn't really like explored the AI for your own work, but how do you feel about this? Like, I guess you're not worried about losing your, being replaced by a robot, but how do you think like the future of your role will be in, let's say, like 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, when some of these things start being more?
I don't think too much will be different in 1 year, to be honest, for my role. But for sure in the future. And I definitely play around with things. I'm just very, very cautious with data and putting it into things. So, for example, at ServiceNow, we have a very strong and clear stance from the company-wide policy saying you cannot put in any sensitive information in ChatGPT or anything like that, right? Yeah. And so that's one of the reasons that I say I don't really use it as much in my day-to-day work because of that concern more than anything. But obviously there's tremendous power in synthesizing text and data. And I would hope that this becomes more accessible to help save a lot of time. Or we see with like, I don't know if you've watched like the YouTube of Microsoft Copilot and things like that, like having something made into a PowerPoint so it's a starting place, that seems great to me, right? Like this would save, I think, a lot of time where I'm doing these mundane, repetitive tasks that I find myself doing a lot. And they're not giving me much joy, to be honest. But I love being able to tell the story and synthesize it and making sure that it resonates and will have impact. And I don't see that going away, but I would love to have it speed up the parts that I don't love. I think that's really exciting. Again, TBD on some of like the data security, safety access of it before I think it will have as much value for me.
Yeah. What's your number one, like, do you ever find yourself like speaking out loud to yourself like, oh, I just can't wait for AI to take away this task from my, what's your number one hate the task as a researcher that you do all the time?
That's a great question. Honestly, I think if it could give me that starting point of making the PowerPoints and like the TLDR executive summaries of everything I've put in that PowerPoint, giving me that starting place would be so awesome. And then being able to help like adjust the tone for it based on who, because I find myself doing that adjustment a lot, right? Like I'm going to this group of stakeholders. Here's how I'm going to change my delivery of my findings. Here's what I know matters to them. So if there is that future where we have that ability to alter the tone, who the audience is, etc., and again, use it as a starting place, that would be tremendous. What we also have heard from a lot of our customers is that's how they are seeing generative AI and our users is they see it as giving them a way to help accelerate to get to that starting place and kind of jumpstart them. And that's where they're seeing a lot of value too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's an interesting, this kind of...
What would be yours?
Well, I mean, this is what I'm researching right now. So I'm kind of taking over this podcast for my own evil purposes. But, we're really, there's so much that you can do, right? You have the whole kind of, all the templating, all of that stuff is just like kind of solved by this, if you are allowed to use the models, right? Yeah. I mean, that's one thing. But all the drafts, the study, like all of this stuff that you do, like you can even like, hey, I want to find out this. Can you create like a 8-task usability test for me that, whatever. All of that stuff, huge potential, obviously. Then you have on the other end of it, you have like all of this stuff that you're talking about now, which is like, generating summaries and stuff like that and changing the tone. I think that was a super interesting perspective. It's like, hey, Tony, he doesn't believe in research. Can you please convince him to write this? And that's kind of cool. But where we're working now is in the middle of it, which is just like having the conversations as a team and like the cognitive load that you're under as a researcher when you're moderating research, basically. So we're just like, hey, push a button and let the AI deal with the note taking instead of you doing it. So it's like there's that whole kind of middle thing too. So I don't really know where it's going to go. I think it's super important what you said earlier. Take a step back. Like, do we really need AI for this, right? Because sometimes we're just like, hey, this is just normal product. Like, why are we making this work with the model? You know? So, but I'll say this: we've always had this kind of goal to help. We talk about this as letting the researchers stay on target. When I came into this like 8-9 years ago or something, like doing research was super hard. You needed to have a lab, or you needed to do like guerrilla research on the street, and you needed to find some people and talk to it and upload it and like cut. It was so hard to do all of these things, right? And a lot of those problems are now solved. And what it allows people to do is like do more research, do more of the stuff that you're actually good at doing. Because I haven't worked in all of these fields, so I don't know if researchers are, if this is true, but I have a feeling that research is one of those fields where there are a lot of these repetitive admin tasks just to get to the research, right? So so I think that's great, and that's what we're seeing in the research too. Like people are worried about like will this replace me, and then they very quickly get excited about like, we have a headline feature that summarizes all the transcripts, so they can just scan a session, a 2-hour session in like 3 minutes, and so then they forget about their fears and like, yes, please replace that. So no, it's an exciting field,
super exciting.
I have a theory that I want to test with all of my guests, and since you're kind of a mixed method person with both quant and qual, I have this feeling that these LLMs will really I don't believe in this qual quant divide, war, whatever. Like we should use both, right? But one of the reasons why we do quant, simplified, is that it just by forcing people, let's say a survey, that kind of quant, right? Not measurement of CPU usage or something like that, but like a survey, right? We're forcing people into, answer 1 to 5, so that we can actually analyze the results from a very large sample, which we can't do where we're like, well, tell us about your life, and then kind of do a huge analysis. But what the LLMs actually do is they allow us to do that. For the first time ever, we can just ask open questions, and we can still look across like 200 interviews and actually find the trend. So how does a mixed method researcher kind of feel about that? And have you thought about that? And what are your kind of thoughts?
I mean, that's a great question. I haven't personally thought about it that much. If this will power the ability to do very large samples of qualitative that may in some ways then mimic more of a quant sample and trends. I think that's really cool. I think one thing I would be slightly concerned about, and I saw, I think it was Nielsen Norman Group, they did that study where they compared, I think it was ChatGPT and maybe a Bard or something, analyzing the trends or doing a thematic analysis of data compared to like 3 human researchers who did it too, and found like quite a bit of overlap with big themes, but really missing the small nuanced themes.
Right.
And so that's what I would be concerned about as well. But perhaps as the technology gets better, and if people put in good enough prompts for it to know to like look for those, maybe that would be addressed. But I'd be a little afraid of what we might lose if we just relied on looking, because there wouldn't be much of a human check, because I don't think anyone's probably going to want to go through 200.
No, right. I mean, right,
that's the value add.
You lose the transparency at scale, right?
You lose that, right? Yeah. So like that gives me pause, because it's like what nuances and themes you lose from the rich qual. Would it even balance the fact of not just sticking with quant?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Thanks for providing your perspective. I haven't thought this through yet, but it's
I haven't
something
thought
that
just
about I keep. I'm like, wait a minute. Does this mean the end of surveys? Like, I don't know. So.
Or we just, use it again to inform, and you identify your bigger themes, and then you go do that survey with a really massive number and see if it is represented in that bigger sample. Like, I don't know. Maybe it's like still mimics that qual-quant balance.
Right.
I'm not sure.
Awesome. Cool. So we've reached that point where unfortunately we have to start getting to the final question. So what would you... Here's my final question. You've been doing this now for a while, and I know that a lot of people that get into this, some people are like, they get into it not because they chose it as a field or because they're excited about it, but because it's a new technology that the company that they work for are going to build products upon, right? So they get thrown into this, and I know there's a lot of hype, and there's some people like, this thing. Can you say something inspiring about like what's the most fun you've had? Like, why is it worthwhile? Like dedicating your life to like researching AI products, particularly.
No pressure. Okay.
No, but like why do you nerd out on that?
Okay. So my thing that I am so excited about and that kind of gets me going every day about it and why I love it is actually the humanity side of it. That we are in this extremely unique position that people, I think, may sometimes think, oh, you're studying AI, you're not even doing things with human and users. But actually, I would argue it's opposite. We're in the position where we get to really elevate and champion humans, the human experience, the human perspectives, the human needs. And it is so needed in this field. And often, if we aren't doing it, that voice and perspective just isn't there. That's not the expertise of a lot of the people who've been trained in it. So we're in this really unique position, I think, to bring in the empathetic view and, again, elevate humanity and say, hey, this needs to earn people's trust. This needs to give them value, augment what they're doing, help them in some way, and make sure that is always happening. And so it's really exciting to me, and I love it. And so for me, it's the humanity part of it.
Awesome. Human technology. Love it. Great. Well, we have to stop talking for this time, unfortunately. But thank you so much. I learned so many things here, and I think this will be great for people already in the field, but also moving into the field, and that's why we do this. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on and sharing your perspective.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.